Good evening and welcome. I'm Bernice, and I'll be serving you today. What can I get for you? A drink? Some snacks? Oh, a little flames! Mocktails exercise. The snacks are real nice. Sodas sound mixed dry. I'm lit, you can't deny. Wherever you want, wherever you need. So good you never, ever want to leave. Anything that you desire, set it on.
Our story begins with the birth of a child. A woman lies beside him, relieved that they have finally met. She calls out to her husband, but he is on the phone, pacing and visibly distraught. He mentions that the company he works for, or owns, has gone bankrupt. Time passes and the scene shifts to the boy as a young child. He is eating, his expression grim, as he laments being born into extreme poverty. "This is just the start of my bad luck," he mutters. In one instance, he picks at some grass and begins calculating aloud that a single meal costs at least 200 yen. Even as a child, his life seems defined by his misfortune. The boy grows older and his streak of bad luck continues. While eating outside, someone accidentally spills a drink on him. When shopping, an item somehow ends up in his bag, making it look like he is a shoplifter. These moments add to his unshakable belief that his life is cursed. At the age of 18, the boy decides to put an end to his misfortune. The scene shifts dramatically as he is seen fighting a massive tiger, an enormous beast standing at least 5 meters tall. The tiger is poised to attack, its eyes glowing with a magical aura. It unleashes its power, tearing into the boy's arm. He grunts in pain, only for his arm to regenerate instantly. As his arm reforms, the boy punches the tiger lightly. He reflects on his situation, thinking, "There's no way I can kill this thing with a single punch. It's going to tear me apart." But to his astonishment, the light punch obliterates the tiger entirely, destroying the area around it in the process. The scene shifts again. The boy is interrupted by a voice asking if he has been paying attention. He finds himself seated across from a child dressed in punk-style gothic attire. The child is smoking, her expression both exasperated and amused. She complains that young people these days don't seem to care, adding that thanks to him, she has failed yet again to quit smoking. The boy, unimpressed, comments, "You're calling me young? You don't look much older yourself." The girl smirks, leaning back in her chair, her feet on the table. "Oh, I'm much older than you think," she replies. "I'm a god." She introduces herself, explaining that she possesses divine power and that she will reincarnate him, a poor soul who died young, into another world. "You'll even get 3 unique abilities," she adds, though the outcomes will be random. She goes on to explain that, unfortunately for him, all 3 of his abilities are essentially duds. "Ridiculous, right?" she chuckles. "So what's your name?" The boy introduces himself. "Mutou Kushina." The god waves dismissively. Right. Your name's hard to remember. Anyway, no matter how you look at it, your luck is terrible." Mutou smirks, surprising her. "Heh? Bad luck," he mutters. The god raises an eyebrow. "What's with that creepy smirk?" Ignoring her comment, Mutou listens as she begins to explain his 3 abilities. "First, you have super speedy regeneration," she says. "It lets you heal instantly. Sounds amazing, right? But there's a catch. You can only use it a limited number of times. Exceed that limit and you die." Mutou nods, muttering, "I see." "Second," she continues, "agelessness. You won't age. Simple enough." Mutou thinks to himself that these abilities don't sound so bad, but the god interrupts his thoughts. "Don't get too excited. You'll figure out why they're all terrible soon enough." "Finally, your third ability, grit, or Indomitable Spirit," she says. "This one's the real kicker." Mutou tilts his head. "What's that supposed to mean?" The god explains using a game analogy. "Every living being has a health gauge. Injuries, illnesses, and all that lower your gauge. When it hits 0, you die. But with grit, you'll be revived, just barely, with 1 point of health." Mutou's eyes widen. "Wait, does that mean I can't die?" The god confirms. "Yes, but only when you're on the brink of death." Mutou thinks it over and comments that the abilities still seem pretty impressive. The god laughs, taking a puff from her cigar. "Oh, they're useless," she says. Confused, Mutou asks why. The god explains, "To activate these skills, you can't fear death. And here's the thing. Every living being has an instinct to survive. Death is terrifying, even for someone like you. No one escapes that fear." She leans closer, her tone mocking. "So, what do you think now? Still feeling confident?" Muto's surroundings suddenly darken, and before he can respond, he is transported to another world. Grass fields and towering trees stretch out before him. The god's voice echoes in his mind. "Good luck surviving, kid. You're going to need it." Mutou looks around, taking in his new surroundings. He mutters to himself, "I won't survive in this world, and my skills are all useless." Mutou looked around and muttered to himself that he was really in another world. All he could see was a forest, and he felt relieved that he wouldn't starve since there were plenty of weeds around. Fortunately, Mutou also found a water source. Despite what the god had said, maybe he'd survive in this new world after all. Suddenly, Mutou remembered something. He saw a woman asking for forgiveness, saying she couldn't do anything for him. Shaking it off, he splashed water on his face, smiled, and told himself that he couldn't think like that. Gotta smile, he thought. If he didn't smile, things would only get worse. As Mutou looked around, he saw a vine that might come in handy and a mushroom. Being in this new world, he figured it could work for him. But unbeknownst to him, a hidden danger was approaching. An ape suddenly appeared above him, and Mutou, relieved that the god hadn't sent him to a town full of people, being around others made him nervous, continued thinking to himself. Busy in his thoughts, the ape slammed the ground, sending Mutou flying a few centimeters. Surprised, Mutou tried to stand up, only to see that his arm had been severed. Screaming in pain, he looked at his severed arm on the ground. But his regeneration ability kicked in, and his arm slowly reformed to its original state. However, just as Mutou regained his footing, the ape slammed him down again, crushing his regenerated arm. The ape grabbed him and lifted him to its face, biting into his torso. As he was being eaten, Mutou suddenly recalled what the god had said. He wouldn't survive in this world. While Mutou struggled, the god watched him from her place, smoking and feeling disappointed. Her skills hadn't worked after all, and Mutou couldn't overcome the world's trial to help with her plans. Now that Mutou was stuck in the ape's stomach, even his super regeneration couldn't save him. As for grit, Indomitable Spirit, it was an absolutely useless skill. The god muttered that Mutou was truly unlucky, and she'd have to find another reincarnation. But then, to her surprise, she heard a sound coming from the screen. She saw Mutou's arm coming out of the ape's stomach, and she shouted, "What the heck is going on?" The ape started choking as Mutou clawed his way out of its stomach. The god was stunned. She couldn't believe that Mutou had survived and was actually clawing his way out. She initially thought his super regeneration had saved him, but it wasn't that. It was the grit, Indomitable Spirit, that had revived him at the brink of death. The god couldn't believe it. Mutou, still inside the ape's stomach, began shouting, "Why did I survive?" He screamed at the top of his lungs. He continued, venting his frustration about being reincarnated by some weird god and being stuck with unnecessary healing skills. He thought he'd finally die for real. The god, watching all this unfold, was speechless. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Mutou complained about how long he'd have to keep living, constantly drawing the short straw. The god, still in shock, was now sweating, trying to understand how Mutou had activated grit, Indomitable Spirit. It was supposed to be impossible to activate it. She started to worry about what kind of twisted guy Mutou really was. Meanwhile, Mutou continued to complain about his life, asking why he had to keep drawing the short end of the stick. Meanwhile, God is still in disbelief that Mutou managed to activate the skill and begins to question who he really is. She glances at her table and realizes she had only skimmed through his file instead of reading it thoroughly. As she takes a closer look at Mutou's life, she is stunned by what she discovers. A scene unfolds of a young Mutou being hit by a car, with paramedics working urgently to keep him conscious. In the background, his parents can be seen talking to the police, their faces filled with apparent worry. Thankfully, Mutou survives the accident and is now recovering in the hospital. A nurse checks in, asking if the painkillers are helping. Mutou quietly replies, "No." The nurse sighs and explains that, since he's still a minor, they can't give him stronger medication, so he'll need to endure the pain for now. Shortly after, Mutou's parents arrive, wearing their signature unsettling smiles. They ask how he's doing in their usual overly cheerful tone, which only adds to the tension. His mother then leans in and asks him how it really feels. Mutou feigns ignorance, pretending not to understand. Frustrated, she moves closer and pulls down his hospital gown, exposing scars across his body. With an accusatory tone, she asks if these scars were truly from the car accident. Mutou, with no energy to argue, mutters a simple, lifeless, yeah. His parents' smiles grow wider, and they begin gushing about how worried they've been. His father shifts the conversation to compensation, gleefully explaining how the accident will lead to a generous payout from the driver involved. He smugly points out that because it was a child who got hurt, the settlement will be substantial, enough to ease their financial troubles for a while. With a satisfied grin, he comments on how their efforts are finally paying off. Here, Mutou reveals the dark truth. None of the accidents in his life were random. His parents had orchestrated everything, from faking falls in restaurants to stuffing items into Mutou's bag to make him look like a shoplifter. It was all calculated. If Mutou got caught, they would dismiss it as an innocent child's mistake. Mutou remembers how it all started when he was just 5 years old. At first, his parents lashed out in frustration over their financial struggles, but what began as occasional scolding escalated into routine punishments. His father would blame him for ruining their lives, shouting at him with anger and disdain. Over time, Mutou realized none of it was his fault, but by then he had already stopped caring. One vivid memory stands out. His mother, exhausted after a long day at work, lashed out at him for not preparing dinner. She struck him on the back with a wire hanger. Another time, his father hit him simply because Mutou didn't laugh at one of his jokes. That was the moment Mutou began practicing his trademark unsettling smile, hoping it might somehow appease his father and reduce the punishments. But the mistreatment only grew worse. His father once shattered a beer bottle over his head. His mother struck him with a hot frying pan. His father, in a drunken rage, threw him against a wall. Even when Mutou was sick, his mother would berate him, pouring water over his face as if to wake him forcibly. On one occasion, she even threatened him with a knife. Day after day, Mutou endured this relentless cycle of cruelty, each moment blending into the next, leaving no room for hope or relief. To Mutou, pain is inevitable. Over time, he mastered the art of completely blocking it out. Watching Mutou's life unfold, the god is stunned but begins to notice a pattern. The skill, grit, Indomitable Spirit allows someone to return from the brink of death with just 1 HP. However, to activate it, one must truly have no fear of death, an almost impossible condition to meet. The concept of no fear of death isn't as simple as it sounds. It doesn't just mean not being afraid of dying. Pain, after all, is the body's mechanism for survival. The brain detects problems in the body through pain, and when someone feels pain, instinctive negative emotions like fear surface. This fear, even in the smallest amount, is a survival instinct that keeps living beings alive. Without the fear of pain, a person wouldn't avoid danger or notice if an illness was harming them, which could ultimately lead to death. In short, fearing pain is deeply tied to the fear of death. For someone to have no fear of death, they would need complete mastery over pain. The god finally realizes why Mutou is able to activate grit, Indomitable Spirit, but she's still in disbelief. Merely enduring pain isn't enough. Even someone who wants to die would instinctively fear pain. She looks back at Mutou's files and reflects on his life. She concludes that his harsh environment forced him to overcome pain completely, and by doing so, he also overcame the fear of death itself. Meanwhile, Mutou stands over the fallen ape, lamenting that it failed to kill him. He mutters about how his bad luck continues. Then he starts laughing to himself, reminiscing about how his entire life has felt like wandering endlessly through a desert with no end in sight. Each day he's grown more tired of living. As he thinks about it, he realizes the only escape from his endless suffering is death. Mutou recalls what God told him about his skills: Speedy Regeneration, Agelessness, and grit, Indomitable Spirit, all of which make him incapable of dying. Yet, despite everything, he remains strangely optimistic. Somewhere deep down, he believes there's still a chance that one day he might finally die. Lost in thought, Mutou suddenly hears a whistling sound. He turns, just in time to see an arrow flying straight at his head. The arrow hits, exploding on impact and evaporating his body. But in seconds, his two skills, Super Regeneration and Grit Indomitable Spirit, activate, bringing him back to life. The assailant, watching from a distance, releases another barrage of explosive arrows, all aimed at Mutou. From the shadows, the attacker mutters, "He's too dangerous to let live." As the camera zooms in, we see a girl in a school uniform holding a bow, her expression serious as she prepares her next shot.